Cole Ashford had 17 minutes before the Elder Council stripped his title, and he was spending them sharpening a blade he had no intention of using. The chamber door groaned open. Grace Whitmore walked in without knocking, because Grace had never knocked on anything in her life. She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, one eyebrow raised in that particular way that meant she had already decided he was being an idiot and was simply waiting for him to catch up. "They are voting in 12 minutes, she said. 17. They moved the session up. Simon convinced 3 of the Eastern elders to come early, something about wanting to resolve the matter before the moon feast. Cole set the blade down. He looked at Grace. She had a scar running from her left ear to the corner of her jaw, a souvenir from a border skirmish 6 years ago that had also taken her mate from her. She never talked about it. She never covered it. It sat on her face like a dare. "What exactly are they voting on?" he asked, though he already knew. "The usual. You are 32. You are unbonded. You are, and I am quoting Simon directly here, a liability to the political future of the Ironfang bloodline." She paused. "He also called you stubborn, but I told him that was generous." Cole almost smiled. Almost. The Ironfang Pack controlled the northern reach of the Ashvale Mountains, a stretch of territory so brutal in winter that most packs refused to even patrol its borders. Cole had held it for 9 years, since the day his father died, and the mantle passed to him like a hot coal dropped into an open hand. 9 years of keeping the borders sealed, the treaties honored, the pack fed and whole. 9 years, and the only thing the council cared about was the fact that he had not picked a woman to stand beside him and produce heirs. He stood, rolled his shoulders. The wolf inside him stirred, not with anger, but with something closer to boredom. The wolf had heard this argument before, and found it uninteresting. "Let them vote," Cole said. Grace did not move from the doorframe. "If they vote, they will demand you bond within the season or forfeit the alliance negotiations with the southern packs. You know that. Then I will forfeit them." Cole. Grace. She looked at him the way she had looked at him since they were children, since before her mate, since before his father's death, since before the scar. Like she could see straight through the wall he had built around himself and was annoyed by the architecture. "Your father bonded at 19, she said quietly. The air in the room changed. "My father bonded at 19 and was buried at 40, Cole said. His voice did not rise. It dropped. It went somewhere low and flat, somewhere beneath the floor. He broke formation during the Eastern raid because he felt her fear through the bond. He abandoned his position. He ran to her, and a blade found his throat while he was running. Grace said nothing. "I was 14, I was standing on the ridge above the valley, and I watched him run. I watched the fastest, smartest alpha the Ironfang had produced in 3 generations throw away every tactical instinct he had because the bond made him feel something that overrode his brain." Cole picked up the blade again, not to sharpen it, just to hold it, something solid, something that did not feel. He was not weak, he was compromised. The bond compromised him, and I will not be compromised. Grace stood there for a long moment. Then she pushed off the doorframe and walked away without another word. Her footsteps faded down the stone corridor. Cole went to the council meeting. He sat through Simon's speech about duty and legacy, and the sacred architecture of the pack bond. He listened to 3 Eastern elders drone about alliance leverage and political marriages. He waited until they were done. Then he told them, in terms that left no room for creative interpretation, that they could take their bonding ultimatum and feed it to the winter wolves. The room went very quiet. Simon, who was 74 and had survived 3 alphas and 2 wars and still had all his teeth, leaned forward in his chair. "Then we send you south, the Ashvale Summit, the war envoy position." Cole understood immediately. They were not offering him an honor. They were removing him from the territory so they could maneuver behind his back. Exile dressed in a title. "Fine," he said. He saw the flicker of surprise cross Simon's face. The old man had expected a fight. Cole was not going to give him one, because the truth was that something in his chest had been pulling south for weeks, a restlessness his wolf could not name, and the opportunity to leave felt less like punishment and more like permission. He departed 3 days later with a war band of 60 wolves. Grace rode beside him because Grace always rode beside him, and because she had packed her gear before the council meeting even started. She had known. She always knew. The ride south took 9 days through frozen passes and dead forests. Cole did not speak much. He reviewed maps. He studied the intelligence reports on the conflict. 3 packs fighting over mineral-rich territory in the southern Ashvale, a dispute that had been simmering for 2 years and was now boiling over into open confrontation. A rogue faction called the Hollow Tongue had emerged in the chaos, wolves who practiced forbidden arts, who had found a way to sever the mate bond through old rituals and weaponize the emptiness it left behind. They were faster than normal wolves. Empty, harder to put down. Cole found them tactically interesting and personally irrelevant. On the last night before they reached the summit camp, Grace left something outside his tent. He found it in the morning. His father's battle cloak, the one that still smelled faintly of pine and iron, the one Cole had not touched in 18 years. There was no note. Grace did not do notes. He left the cloak where it was. He told himself he did not look back at it as he walked toward the summit. He looked back at it twice. The war summit was held in a sprawling timber hall at the base of the southern range. Commanders from 9 packs had gathered, along with their advisors, their strategists, and their healers. The hall smelled like wet fur and political tension. Cole entered, assessed the room in 4 seconds, identified 3 potential allies, 2 definite enemies, and 1 person whose allegiance he could not read, a tall commander from the Western Reach who smiled too much. He took his seat. He spread his maps. He prepared to be bored by speeches and frustrated by politics. The tent flap opened one more time. She walked in carrying a medical kit that was bigger than she was, held together with leather straps and what appeared to be sheer stubbornness. She was not tall. She was not commanding. She moved through the room like she had somewhere more important to be, and this summit was an inconvenience she was tolerating out of professional obligation. Lena Marsh, healer. Attached to a neutral pack that had no stake in the territorial dispute, but had sent medical support because people were dying, and Lena Marsh apparently took that personally. She smelled like pine smoke, and something older, something that sat beneath the smoke, like a foundation stone, something that had been waiting in the architecture of the world for Cole Ashford to walk into this specific room on this specific day. His wolf lunged. Not outward, inward. It slammed against the inside of his ribs so hard that his hand shot out and grabbed the arm of his chair, and the wood cracked under his grip, a sharp splintering sound that made 3 nearby commanders turn and stare. Cole did not look at them. He was looking at Lena Marsh, who was arguing with a supply officer about the placement of her field station and had not noticed him at all. Pine smoke, and something older. He stood. He walked out of the tent. He stood in the snow outside, breathing, and counted to 60. Then he counted to 60 again. His wolf was pacing inside him, not with aggression but with a terrible, focused certainty, the kind of certainty that Cole had spent 18 years building walls against. He stayed outside for 11 minutes. When he went back in, he chose a seat on the opposite side of the hall. He did not look at Lena Marsh again. He did not need to. His wolf had already memorized every detail. The bandage she used as a hair tie, the ink stain on her left thumb, the way she stood with her weight on 1 foot, slightly tilted, like she was always ready to pivot toward whoever needed her next. Grace found him after the summit session ended. She took 1 look at his face and said nothing, but something shifted in her expression, something that looked, if Cole had been willing to name it, like relief. He was not willing to name it. That night, alone in his tent, Cole pressed his palm flat against his chest and felt his heartbeat. It was steady. It was strong. It was, for the first time in 18 years, beating in a rhythm he did not recognize. He closed his eyes. South. The pull had been south. Now he knew why. The war had not started yet, but something else had, something quieter and more dangerous than any battle, something that crept in through a cracked chair and a scent of pine smoke and settled into the marrow of a man who had sworn he would never be compromised. Cole Ashford, alpha of the Ironfang Pack, lay in the dark and listened to his own treacherous heart, and knew with absolute certainty that everything he had built was about to come apart. He did not sleep. He sharpened his blade instead, because blades were simple, blades were honest, blades did not smell like pine smoke, and rearranged the entire structure of a man's chest without asking permission. Grace, in the next tent, heard the sound of steel on stone and understood. She rolled over and went to sleep with something close to a smile, the first one in years, hidden against the rough canvas of her pillow. The war began 3 days later. Cole threw himself into it like a man diving into cold water, hoping the shock would drown out the new and terrifying music playing in his blood. It did not. The first season of fighting taught Cole 3 things. The Hollow Tongue were not a ragtag rebellion. They were organized, funded, and strategically patient. They did not attack like wolves. They attacked like a disease, slow, adaptive, targeting the weakest point in any formation. And they had no fear, which was the most dangerous thing about them, because fear was what kept soldiers alive. Without it, they fought like creatures who had already decided they were dead and were simply finishing the paperwork. The second thing Cole learned was that the war would not end in one season. The coalition of 9 packs could barely agree on supply routes, let alone coordinated offensives. Every alpha wanted to lead. Every commander wanted credit. Cole spent more time in strategy tents arguing with allies than he spent in the field fighting enemies. The third thing he learned was Lena Marsh's schedule. He did not intend to learn it. It happened the way weather happens, gradually and then all at once. Her field camp sat 2 ridges behind his forward position, close enough that his scouts passed it on rotation, close enough that the wind sometimes carried pine smoke south to his command post. She ran the camp with 5 healers and a supply chain held together by stubbornness and creative cursing. She was up before dawn. She worked until the light failed. She slept in the medical tent because the wounded needed her more than her cot did. Cole knew these things because his scouts reported them. He had not asked for these reports. His scouts provided them anyway because his wolves had developed an unspoken consensus that their alpha had gone slightly insane in a way they found entertaining, and feeding him information about the healer was their version of a spectator sport. Grace, predictably, said nothing about any of this. She had an entire vocabulary of silence. The silence she deployed around the subject of Lena Marsh was her most articulate work yet. Months passed. The Ashvale winter came down like a hammer, freezing the passes and compressing the war into tight valleys where wolves fought in mud and ice and fading light. Cole commanded from the front because he did not believe in leading from behind, and because the wolf inside him needed the fight, needed the clarity of violence to drown out the other thing, the pull, the constant southward drag that had relocated itself from his chest to the base of his spine and sat there like a second heartbeat. He did not speak to Lena. He did not visit her camp. He maintained a professional distance that was, if he was being honest with himself, the most exhausting tactical operation he had ever conducted. Then Derek came in on a stretcher. Derek Price was 23 and had been one of Cole's forward scouts for 2 years. He was fast, smart, annoyingly optimistic, and had a habit of naming the crows that followed the warband. He called the biggest one Harold. He was the kind of soldier who made war bearable by refusing to let it make him serious. The Hollow Tongue caught him on a ridge patrol. They did not simply wound him. They cursed him. Hollow Tongue fighters carried a corruption in their claws, a residue of the bond-severing rituals they practiced. It got into the blood like poison and rotted outward, not killing the body but attacking something deeper, something connected to the wolf spirit, the part of a shifter that was not entirely physical. By the time Derek reached Lena's field camp, the corruption had spread across his chest, like black frost on glass. His wolf was fading. You could see it in his eyes, the amber dimming, the human part rising, to fill the space where the animal used to be. Cole arrived at the tent to make a decision no alpha wanted to make: save him or end his suffering. The corruption was advanced. Most healers would have called it terminal and moved on to patients they could actually help. Lena was not most healers. She was elbow deep in Derek's chest wound, her hands coated in something dark and herbal and foul-smelling, her hair escaping its bandage tie and falling across her face, and she was talking to Derek in a tone that was somewhere between a lecture and a threat. "If you die on my table, Derek Price, I will follow you into the afterworld and make your eternity miserable. Do you understand me? Nod if you understand." Derek, who was barely conscious and shaking with pain, managed a weak nod. Cole stepped into the tent. Lena looked up. She saw the alpha of the Ironfang Pack standing there, with the expression of a man who had come to make a hard call, and she dismissed his entire authority with a single sentence. "You can stand there being dramatic, or you can hold his legs down. Pick." Cole held the legs. He stayed for 4 hours. He watched Lena work. She was methodical, relentless, and absolutely unwilling to accept the outcome the corruption was trying to impose. She fought for Derek the way Cole fought battles, with precision and fury, and a stubborn refusal to acknowledge the possibility of losing. She used techniques Cole had never seen, old healing methods mixed with field innovations she had clearly invented herself. At one point she snapped at one of her assistants, "If you hand me the wrong root one more time, I will make you eat it," and the assistant moved so fast he knocked over a tray of instruments. Derek survived. The corruption retreated. His wolf came back in stages over the following weeks, the amber returning to his eyes, like color bleeding back into a faded photograph. Cole left the tent at dawn. He walked back to his command post. He sat down. He picked up a strategy report and stared at it for 20 minutes, without reading a single word. Grace brought him tea. He drank it without tasting it. "She is something," Grace said. Cole said nothing. "I said she is something." "I heard you." Grace left. The silence she left behind was her masterpiece. After that night, the distance Cole maintained became harder to hold. Not because he sought Lena out, he did not, but because the war kept pushing them together with the relentless efficiency of a current, pulling two objects toward the same drain. He rerouted patrols past her camp. He told himself it was strategic, that the camp needed better coverage, that the Hollow Tongue had shown interest in targeting medical positions. These were not lies exactly. They were truths, arranged in a convenient shape. His wolves noticed. Of course they did. Wolves always notice. They said nothing because they liked breathing, but the camp developed a quiet, collective awareness that their alpha had a weakness, and that weakness smelled like pine smoke, and had a habit of yelling at wounded soldiers. Lena, for her part, seemed unaware of Cole's existence in any capacity beyond professional. She treated his wolves when they came in hurt. She sent supply requests through proper channels. She attended the weekly command briefings and sat in the back and took notes, and left without speaking to anyone who was not directly involved in patient logistics. This was, Cole would later understand, her own version of his wall. She was not unaware. She was fortified. Lena Marsh carried her own architecture of grief. Her original pack, a small settlement called Green Hollow in the eastern valleys, had been destroyed by a Hollow Tongue raid 18 months before the war summit. Every member slaughtered. Every structure burned, and Lena had not been there. She had been 2 villages away, treating a child with a fever that turned out to be nothing more than a bad tooth. She had chosen a child's comfort over her pack's survival, and the math of that choice had restructured the entire foundation of her mind. She did not leave her patients. Ever. She slept in the medical tent. She ate standing up, usually something cold, usually while reviewing charts. Leaving meant someone might die. Staying meant she could prevent it. The logic was airtight and completely insane, and she maintained it with the disciplined precision of someone who knew it was insane and had decided that sanity was a luxury she had not earned. Cole did not know any of this yet. He knew the surface, the competence, the fire, The way she ran her camp like a small nation with a population of the wounded and a constitution built entirely on the principle that dying was not permitted without her explicit consent. The subterranean truth would come later. What came first was the ambush. It happened on a Wednesday, though days of the week had lost most of their meaning by the war's second year. A hollow-tongued strike force, 30 strong, hit Lena's camp from the eastern tree line at the hour just before dawn, when the human body is at its weakest and the wolf spirit sleeps lightest. Cole was 4 miles north, reviewing overnight patrol reports. He felt it before the messenger arrived. Not a sound, not a signal. Something deeper, something in the bond he had not acknowledged and would not name. A sudden sharp wrongness that hit him in the center of his chest like a fist. He was running before he made the conscious decision to move. 4 miles through frozen forest, through deadfall and ice-crusted streams, and darkness that would have stopped any normal wolf. Cole covered it in minutes. His body shifted as he ran, not fully wolf and not fully man, something caught between, a half-form that his soldiers had never seen him use because he had never needed to, because it required a loss of control that Cole Ashford did not permit. He permitted it now. He came through the tree line into the camp like a storm front. The scene was chaos, tents burning, wolves fighting in the mud, the medical supplies scattered like confetti at the worst celebration in history. And Lena Marsh, who weighed 130 pounds soaking wet and had no combat training beyond what every healer learned as a matter of survival, was standing over 3 fallen hollow-tongued fighters with a bone saw in one hand and a surgical blade in the other. Her medical coat was torn. Her hands were steady. She had the expression of a woman who had made her peace with dying and was absolutely furious about the inconvenience. Cole stopped. 1 heartbeat. 2. She looked at him. Her eyes were dark and wild and entirely unbroken. He turned and walked into the trees where the remaining attackers had retreated. What happened in those trees took approximately 6 minutes and was never discussed in detail by anyone who witnessed the aftermath. When he came back, Lena was treating a wounded attacker, one of the wolves who had just tried to destroy her camp. She was cleaning a gash on his arm and telling him, in a conversational tone, that if he moved again, she would let the wound get infected out of spite. She did not look up when Cole entered. He stood there, covered in mud and breathing hard, and watched a woman show mercy to her enemy because the wound existed and she was a healer, and that was the end of the equation for her. Something in his chest unlocked. Not opened, he was not ready for open, but the lock turned, a quarter rotation, enough to let a sliver of light through the door he had sealed shut at 14 years old on a ridge above a valley where his father bled out for love. He wanted to say something, he had no idea what. Lena finished bandaging the attacker's arm. She stood. She looked at Cole for the second time that night, and this time her gaze held for 3 full seconds, which was the longest she had ever looked at him directly. "Your wolves are hurt," she said. "Send them to me." Then she turned and walked back into what was left of her medical tent, stepping over debris and wreckage like it was a minor inconvenience, like the destruction of everything she had built was just another problem to solve before breakfast. Cole sent his wolves to her, every one of them. Then he walked to the edge of the camp and sat on a fallen log and stared at the sky until the sun came up, because he could not go back to his command post and pretend that the last hour had not rearranged every molecule in his body. Grace found him there at dawn. She sat beside him. She did not speak. After a long time, Cole said, "Do not say it." Grace said, "I was not going to." They sat together in the cold morning light, and the war continued around them, indifferent and endless. And somewhere behind them, Lena Marsh was rebuilding her camp with the same furious efficiency she brought to everything, and Cole Ashford was trying very hard to remember why he had spent 18 years believing that the bond was the enemy. The memory was getting harder to hold. His father's face on the ridge, the running, the blade. But now there was another image beside it, a woman with a bone saw and steady hands, standing alone in the wreckage of her life, and refusing, absolutely refusing to fall. He pressed his palm against his chest. The heartbeat was there, steady and strong, and it was beating in that new rhythm again, the one he did not recognize, the one that had started in a timber hall with the scent of pine smoke and had not stopped since. He let it beat. Just for a moment. Just this once. The war ground through its second year and into its third, and somewhere in the machinery of all that fighting, Cole Ashford and Lena Marsh became something that did not have a name. It was not a courtship. Courtship had rituals, declarations, a structure borrowed from generations of wolves who did things properly. What Cole and Lena had was more like a gravitational accident, two objects that had wandered too close to each other and now orbited at a fixed distance, never touching, never separating, warping the space between them in ways that everyone in both camps could feel. His wolves called it nothing because his wolves valued their teeth. Her healers called it nothing because Lena had once thrown a bedpan at an assistant who asked if the alpha visited often. The orbit had its own physics. Cole would pass her camp during inspections and find reasons to pause, checking the structural integrity of a support beam, examining a supply crate, asking one of her healers a question about wound treatment that he already knew the answer to. Lena would send medical reports to his command post that were slightly longer than necessary, with notes in the margins about patrol routes she thought were underprotected, and if those routes happened to be the ones nearest her camp, neither of them mentioned it. They talked, not often, and never about anything that mattered. They talked about supply logistics and troop movements and the weather. They talked about the specific failures of the coalition command structure, which was one of 3 subjects on which they agreed completely. They talked about Derek Price, who had recovered fully and had named 2 more crows, bringing his total to 4. Cole had once suggested that naming battlefield scavengers was perhaps not the healthiest coping mechanism, and Lena had looked at him and said, "This from the man who sharpens blades he never uses," and Cole had walked away before his face could betray him. The subterranean current ran beneath every conversation, every shared glance, every carefully maintained distance. It was there, in the way Cole's wolf went quiet, truly quiet, not restless but still, whenever Lena was near. It was there in the way Lena's hands, which never trembled during surgery, which never wavered while holding a dying soldier's life together, would pause, just for a fraction of a second, whenever Cole entered her line of sight. Grace watched all of this with the patience of a woman who had lived through her own bond, her own loss, and knew exactly what she was seeing. She did not push, she did not comment, she maintained her silence with the dedication of an artist protecting a masterpiece. The war, meanwhile, was changing shape. Cole's intelligence network had been tracking the Hollow Tongue leadership for months, and the picture that emerged was worse than anyone had expected. The faction was not led by a single alpha, it was led by a pair, a bonded alpha and his mate named Philip and Clara Ashworth, who had willingly severed their own bond through the old rituals. The severing should have destroyed them. Instead, it had transformed them. The void left by the broken bond had become a weapon, a hollow space inside them that consumed the bonds of other wolves, feeding on connection the way fire feeds on air. They were the source. Every hollow-tongue fighter, every cursed wound, every bond-rotting corruption on the battlefield traced back to Philip and Clara Ashworth and the emptiness they had chosen to become. The strategic implications were devastating. To end the war, the Ashworths had to be destroyed, and the only weapon that could match a weaponized void was its opposite, an intact bond, a connection strong enough to resist the pull of that emptiness and burn it out. Cole understood what this meant before anyone said it out loud. The War Council said it out loud anyway. The meeting took place in the main command tent, on a night when the rain was coming down so hard it sounded like the sky was trying to wash the mountains off the map. 12 commanders sat around the central table. Cole sat at the north end. Lena was not present because healers did not attend tactical meetings, which was a rule Cole had never appreciated more than at this exact moment. Commander Hugh Baxter, a thick-necked alpha from the Western Reach, who had the diplomatic subtlety of a falling tree, was the one who proposed it. The Ashworths severed their bond and weaponized the gap. The counter-weapon is an intact bond at full strength. We have an unbonded alpha sitting right here who has been circling a healer for 2 years, like a hawk that forgot how to land. He looked directly at Cole. Bond with her. Formalize it. Use it. The room went still. Cole's hands were flat on the table. He did not move them. He did not clench them into fists, though every fiber of his body wanted to. He looked at Hugh Baxter with an expression that made 3 nearby commanders shift in their seats. "No," Cole said. "This is not a personal request, Ashford. This is strategy. The bond is a weapon. Use it." "The bond is not a weapon." "Everything is a weapon if you need it badly enough." Cole stood. The chair behind him scraped across the floor. The sound was sharp in the quiet tent, like a blade drawn across stone. "If any person in this room mentions the healer as a tactical asset again, I will consider it a personal challenge, and I will respond accordingly." Hugh Baxter opened his mouth. Grace, who was standing behind Cole's chair, leaned forward and whispered something in Baxter's ear that no one else heard. Whatever she said, it worked. Baxter's mouth closed. His face went a particular shade of gray. He did not bring up the subject again. The meeting ended. The commanders filed out. Cole remained, standing at the table, his hands still pressed flat against the wood, staring at the map of the Ashvale Range like it had personally offended him. He was not angry about the suggestion. He was angry because the suggestion was correct. The bond between him and Lena was real. It was strong. It was, if he stopped lying to himself for 30 seconds, the most powerful force he had encountered in his entire life, stronger than duty, stronger than fear, stronger than the memory of his father running toward his mother and dying for the privilege. And they wanted to turn it into a line item on a battle plan. They wanted to take the one thing Cole could not control, the one part of his life that had resisted his discipline and his walls and his 18 years of calculated emptiness, and reduce it to tactical advantage. He could not allow it, not because the strategy was wrong, but because claiming Lena for any reason other than the truth would be a corruption worse than anything the hollow tongue had ever produced. Grace found him still standing at the table an hour later. The rain had stopped. The tent was cold. "You should eat," she said. "I am not hungry. You should eat anyway." He looked at her. "They want me to use her, Grace. They want me to take the bond and turn it into a weapon." Grace sat down across from him. She folded her hands. She looked at him with those steady gray eyes that had seen everything and judged very little. "Is that what stops you? The tactical framing?" "What else would stop me?" Grace raised one eyebrow. It was the eyebrow that meant she was about to say something true, and he was not going to like it. "Your father did not die because of the bond, Cole. He died because of a blade. The bond made him run. The blade made him dead. You have spent 18 years blaming the wrong thing." Cole stared at her. "The bond did not compromise him," Grace said. "The war did. The enemy did. A piece of sharpened steel did. If you want to be angry at something, be angry at the wolf who held the blade, not the woman your father loved enough to run for." She stood. She walked to the tent entrance. She paused. "And for what it is worth," she said without turning around, "your mother survived that raid. The enemy came for her, and she fought them off alone, with a broken arm and 2 of your father's wolves beside her. She did not need him to save her. He did not die because the bond made him weak. He died because love does not make you bulletproof, and that is not the same thing." She left. Cole sat in the empty tent for a very long time after that. Lena came to his tent that night. She had never come to his tent before. She knocked, which she did on every door except his healing tent, where the door was always open because closed doors meant someone might not get help fast enough. He opened the flap. She was standing in the mud, her medical coat over her shoulders, her hair in its perpetual bandage tie, her face unreadable. "Can I come in?" she asked. He stepped aside. She entered. She looked around his tent with the clinical assessment she brought to everything, noting the maps on the folding table, the blade he kept beside his cot, The cloak folded at the foot of his bedroll, his father's cloak, which he had retrieved from the snow 2 years ago and never told anyone about. She did not sit. She stood in the center of the tent and looked at him, and for a moment the two of them existed in a space that was entirely separate from the war, from the council, from the hollow tongue and the coalition and the strategic mathematics of the bond. "I heard about the meeting," she said. "The proposal." Cole's jaw tightened. "Who told you?" "Derek. He heard it from one of Hugh Baxter's wolves, who apparently has the discretion of a town crier." "I refused." "I know you refused. Derek told me that too, along with a dramatic reenactment that I suspect was not entirely accurate." She paused. "I did not come to talk about the meeting." "Then why did you come?" Lena looked at the ground, then at the tent wall, then at the maps. She was circling the things she wanted to say, the way a healer circles a wound, assessing the edges, determining the depth, deciding on the approach. "There is a plant," she said, "Felis root. It grows only in soil that has been burned. Forest fires, lightning strikes, battle-scorched ground. It cannot grow in clean earth. It needs the destruction. It needs the soil to have been broken open and emptied before it can take hold." Cole said nothing. He listened. "The interesting thing about Felis root is what it does once it grows. It heals everything. You can use it for infections, for curse wounds, for corruption, for damage that nothing else can reach. The worse the burn, the deeper the destruction, the stronger the root grows and the more it can repair." She looked at him. "It is the most powerful healing agent in the known world, and it only exists because something terrible happened to the ground it lives in." The tent was very quiet. "I am not telling you what to do," Lena said. "I am a healer. I describe conditions. I do not prescribe choices." She moved toward the tent flap. "But I thought you should know about the plant." She left. Cole stood in the center of his tent, holding the metaphor like something fragile and dangerous, like a glass vial filled with something that could cure or combust, depending on how you held it. She was telling him that damage was not disqualification, that the burned ground of his father's death, of her pack's destruction, of 18 years of deliberate emptiness and 2 years of stubborn isolation, was not a wasteland. It was a seedbed. The thing that could grow there, if he let it, would be stronger than anything planted in clean, untouched soil. He understood. He picked up his father's cloak from the foot of his cot. He held it to his face. Pine and iron. The scent had faded over 18 years, but it was still there, underneath everything, a foundation that had never fully disappeared. His father had run for love. His father had died for love. And Cole had spent 18 years calling that weakness, because the alternative, calling it the bravest thing a man could do, was too terrifying to face. He folded the cloak carefully and placed it back on the cot. He did not go after Lena. Not yet. The Felis root needed burned soil, but it also needed time. The seed had to sit in the ash, in the dark, in the ruined earth, before it could begin the slow and stubborn work of becoming something that healed. Cole gave it time. He gave it exactly 48 hours. And then the hollow tongue came for the healers, and time was the one thing nobody had left. The attack was not random. It was architecture. Philip Ashworth had studied the coalition's structure for 3 years, and he had found its pressure point. Not the commanders, not the supply lines, not the fortifications or the strategic passes or the alpha war councils where loud men argued over maps. The healers. The people who stitched the army back together after every engagement, who kept the wounded alive, who gave the fighters a reason to believe that getting hurt was not the same as getting finished. Take the healers, and the army bleeds out from the inside. The hollow tongue hit every field camp along the Ashvale front within the same hour. Coordinated, simultaneous, 30 separate strikes on 30 separate medical stations, timed to the minute, executed with the cold precision of a surgeon cutting along predetermined lines. The irony was deliberate. Philip Ashworth had a poet's taste for cruelty. Cole was in the main command tent when the reports started coming in. Western Camp, overrun. Southern Ridge Station, burning. East Valley Clinic, gone. The reports arrived like hammer blows, one after another, each one a medical station erased from the map, each one a team of healers who had been doing nothing but saving lives and were now fighting for their own. Cole processed the first 4 reports with the analytical detachment of a commander in crisis. He dispatched reinforcements. He coordinated response teams. He reorganized defensive perimeters. His mind was a machine, a beautiful, brutal machine that turned chaos into order through the application of ruthless logic. The 5th report broke the machine. Grace came through the tent flap at a run. Grace did not run. Grace walked with deliberate purpose through every situation, including the one that had killed her mate, including the ones that had nearly killed her. Grace running was a violation of natural law. Her camp went dark an hour ago, Grace said. Cole's hands stopped moving on the map. We lost contact with the Eastern Ridge Station at the same time as the others. I sent a runner. The runner has not returned. Cole looked at the map. Lena's camp was marked with a small blue pin because blue was the color designated for medical installations, and he had placed that pin himself 6 months ago, pressing it into the canvas with more care than the task required. The pin was 4 miles from his current position. His wolf did not lunge. His wolf did not pace or snarl or throw itself against his ribs the way it had in the timber hall 2 years ago. His wolf went silent, completely, utterly, terrifyingly silent, the way the world goes silent before an earthquake, the way sound leaves a room when something fundamental is about to change. The silence was worse than any howl. The silence meant the bond he had not claimed, had not named, had not permitted, was straining at the edge of something it could not survive. It meant that somewhere 4 miles east, Lena Marsh was in danger, and the thread between them, the invisible, impossible, undeniable thread that had been spinning itself since a timber haul and a scent of pine smoke, was pulling so tight that it was about to either hold or snap, and if it snapped, something inside Cole Ashford would die, and it would not be the part that could be healed. He looked at Grace. She looked back at him. In her eyes, he saw his own reflection, and the reflection was a man who had just run out of walls to hide behind. "Take command," he said. Already done. He took 12 wolves and ran. The tactical part of his brain, the part that had kept him alive for 9 years as Alpha and 3 years as a warfield commander, screamed at him. Splitting forces during a coordinated enemy offensive was textbook self-destruction. Leaving the command post during a crisis was abandonment. Taking a dozen wolves on a rescue mission when the entire front was under attack was the exact kind of emotional decision that had gotten his father killed on a ridge 18 years ago. Cole ran anyway. The forest was dark. The trees were thick. The ground was frozen and uneven and littered with deadfall that could break an ankle or a neck with equal indifference. Cole moved through it like something unleashed, his body shifting between forms as the terrain demanded, human for the narrow passages, wolf for the open stretches, that unnamed in-between form for the impossible parts, the sheer climbs and the frozen streams, and the places where the forest seemed to close like a fist. His 12 wolves followed. They did not question. They did not hesitate. They ran behind their alpha with the unquestioning faith of soldiers who had followed this man through 3 years of war and had learned that when Cole Ashford ran, you ran with him and asked questions later. They covered 4 miles in under 15 minutes. It should have taken 30. Cole did not know how he did it. He would never be able to explain it. The bond pulled, and he followed, and the distance between him and Lena Marsh compressed like a thing that had never been real in the first place. Like the 4 miles had been an illusion the world maintained, only because no one had ever needed to cross them badly enough. The camp was gone, not destroyed in the way the other camps had been destroyed, burned and shattered and left as wreckage. The camp had been dismantled, tents torn down, supplies scattered. The hollow tongue had been thorough, but they had also been interrupted because the wreckage was incomplete, because some of the tents were only half collapsed, because the destruction had a ragged edge that suggested someone had fought back hard enough to disrupt the timeline. There were fallen hollow tongue fighters on the ground, 5 of them, taken down not with wolf strength but with ingenuity, with traps made from medical equipment, with tripwires strung from surgical thread, with a defensive perimeter built from supply crates and determination. Lena's work. He knew it the way he knew his own handwriting. But she was not there. Cole stood in the wreckage of the camp and breathed. The bond was still intact. He could feel it, a thin, bright line running east from his chest into the darkness, pulling him toward the mountains. She was alive. She was close. She was moving. He followed. The trail led into a cave system 3 miles from the camp, a series of connected chambers that burrowed into the mountain like veins in stone. Cole tracked by scent, by the bond's pull, by an instinct older than thought. His wolves fanned out behind him, covering the entrance, securing the perimeter, moving with the silent efficiency of a pack that had been fighting together long enough to communicate without words. He found her in the 3rd chamber. Lena Marsh was standing in the center of a rough stone room, lit by 2 medical lanterns she had carried from the camp. Around her, arranged on makeshift pallets of blankets and torn canvas and anything soft she could find, lay 11 patients, 11 wounded wolves she had carried, dragged, supported, and bullied through 3 miles of frozen mountain terrain, while a hollow-tongue attack force burned her camp behind her. She had not left them. She had not left a single one. Her coat was gone. Her hands were wrapped in strips of her own shirt. Makeshift bandages covering what Cole could see were burn marks and cuts. She had used her own blood for at least 3 separate healing rituals, the kind of deep tissue mending that drew on the healer's own life force, and the cost was visible in her face, in the gray tinge of her skin, in the way she stood with her weight distributed carefully, like a building that had lost a support column and was compensating through sheer architectural stubbornness. She was standing on borrowed hours. She knew it. She was treating a patient anyway. Cole stepped into the light. His wolves remained at the chamber entrance, instinctively understanding that this moment was not for them. Lena looked up. Her eyes were dark. Her hands were steady. She was the most beautiful and the most terrible thing he had ever seen. A woman who had traded pieces of her own life to keep 11 strangers alive and would do it again without hesitation if the mathematics demanded it. "I did not leave them," she said. 2 years. 2 years of orbiting, of distance, of walls and silence, and gravitational physics. "I know," he said. The bond completed. It did not happen with a flash, or a roar, or any of the dramatic nonsense the old stories described. It happened in the quiet, between 2 sentences. It happened in the space between "I did not leave them" and "I know," a space that contained everything they had never said to each other, every patrol rerouted past her camp, every medical report with notes in the margins, every careful distance maintained, and every accidental closeness permitted. Cole crossed the chamber and knelt beside her, not in front of her, not in submission or declaration, but beside her, because beside was where he belonged, and he was done pretending otherwise. "Which ones need treatment first?" he asked. Lena blinked. For one moment, just one, the fortress cracked, and he saw what was behind it, not weakness but exhaustion, not vulnerability, but the desperate, bone-deep relief of a woman who had been holding up a collapsing world with nothing but her hands and had just felt someone else reach in and share the weight. Then the fortress rebuilt itself, because Lena Marsh was who she was, and she pointed to the patient on the far left and said, "Him. Chest wound, corruption at the edges, needs binding before the infection spreads. The woman next to him has a broken femur that I set but could not stabilize. The man in the corner has not spoken in 2 hours, and I think the bond corruption has reached his nervous system." Cole relayed the information to his wolves. They moved. Medical supplies appeared. Order emerged from chaos with the speed and precision of people who understood that this was not the time for ceremony. Lena worked. Cole stayed beside her, passing tools, holding patients, relaying orders, doing everything she asked, without question, and nothing she did not ask for without presumption. At some point during the 4th hour, she stopped. She was sitting on the cave floor between 2 patients, her hands finally still, her eyes half closed. She leaned sideways, 1 inch, maybe 2. Her shoulder touched his. Cole did not move. She fell asleep against him in under a minute, the way the body shuts down when it finally believes it is safe enough to stop fighting. He sat with her weight against his shoulder and did not move for 4 hours. His legs went numb. His back ached. A cramp developed in his left calf that climbed all the way to his hip and set up permanent residence. He did not move. He would sit on this cave floor until the mountain crumbled around them, if that was what it took, because Lena Marsh was sleeping against his shoulder and the bond was alive between them, raw and new and real, and he would hold this position until his bones turned to stone before he did anything to disturb it. Dawn came. Gray light filtered through the cave entrance. The patients were stable. His wolves had maintained the perimeter through the night without incident. The hollow tongue had moved on, either satisfied with the damage they had done or unwilling to push deeper into the mountains where Cole Ashford was waiting. Lena woke. She lifted her head from his shoulder. She looked at him. Her eyes were clear. "Your legs are numb," she said. It was not a question. Extremely. That was medically inadvisable. "I am aware." She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she stood and winced and pressed a hand to her ribs where a bruise had developed overnight and turned to check on her patients because that was what Lena Marsh did. She checked on her patients. Cole stood. It took him 3 attempts because his legs had indeed lost most of their connection to the concept of standing. His wolves, who were pretending not to watch, watched anyway. He walked to the cave entrance. The morning air hit him like a wall of cold water, and he stood in it and breathed and felt the bond humming in his chest, a constant low vibration, like a second heartbeat, like a song he had been hearing his whole life through a wall and had finally walked to the other side to hear clearly. He sent one message, to Grace, to the council, to every alpha on the Ashvale line. 6 words. "The war ends today. Stand clear." Grace received the message at the main command post. She read it once. She folded it. She placed it inside her vest pocket, over her heart, in the exact place where she used to keep letters from her own mate before the war took him. Then she turned to the assembled commanders, who were still reeling from the overnight attacks, and said, in a voice that permitted no debate, "The Alpha has given the order. Full offensive. Every unit, every reserve, every wolf who can stand. We move within the hour." Hugh Baxter opened his mouth. "Within the hour, Commander Baxter," Grace repeated, and her tone suggested that the hour was negotiable, but her patience was not. The coalition moved. Cole left the cave with Lena's voice in his ears, her last words before he departed, delivered while she was changing a patient's bandages without looking up. "Come back in one piece. I have limited supplies and I am not wasting them on you because you did something heroic and stupid." He almost smiled, almost. The Hollow Tongue stronghold was a fortress carved into the northern face of the Ashvale Range, a natural cave system that Philip Ashworth had reinforced and expanded over 3 years into something between a military installation and a temple. The walls were etched with bond-severing runes. The corridors were designed to separate and disorient. The entire structure was a weapon, built to weaken the wolf spirit, to erode the connection between the human and animal halves of any shifter who entered. Cole felt it the moment he crossed the threshold, a pulling, a tugging at the edges of himself, like invisible hands trying to peel his wolf away from the rest of him. The bond corruption seeping from the walls, from the floor, from the very stone of the mountain. 3 years of Hollow Tongue rituals had saturated the place with emptiness, a void that reached out and tried to fill itself with whatever it could consume. His wolves felt it too. Some stumbled, some slowed. Derek Price, who had survived the bond corruption once already and carried the memory in his bones, went pale but kept moving, because Derek Price had named 4 crows and survived a curse that should have ended him, and he was not going to let a haunted cave system be the thing that stopped him. The battle inside the stronghold was nothing like the open field engagements of the past 3 years. It was close, tight, claustrophobic. Wolves fighting in narrow corridors, where there was no room to maneuver and no space for strategy, only the brutal mathematics of who wanted it more and who was willing to pay the higher price. Cole's wolves paid. They paid in blood and pain, and the grinding cost of fighting through a place designed to dismantle them from the inside out. But they kept moving, corridor by corridor, chamber by chamber, pushing deeper into the mountain toward the heart of the stronghold where Philip and Clara Ashworth waited. Grace commanded the outer assault, sealing the exits, cutting supply lines, collapsing escape routes with the methodical precision she had learned over a lifetime of serving alphas who made emotional decisions and needed someone behind them to clean up the strategic consequences. She did not enter the stronghold. Her job was the perimeter. Her job was making sure that whatever happened inside the mountain stayed inside the mountain, and that nothing crawled out of the darkness that was not supposed to. Cole reached the central chamber alone. Not because his wolves had fallen, they had not. They were fighting through the surrounding corridors with savage determination, but because the final corridor narrowed to a passage that only one wolf could walk at a time, and Cole walked it first, because he had always walked first, and because the bond in his chest was burning now, a steady furnace heat that pushed back against the cold void of the stronghold with every step he took. Philip and Clara Ashworth were waiting. They stood at the center of a circular chamber carved from black stone, surrounded by runes that pulsed with a faint, sick light. They were not what Cole expected. Philip was thin, almost gaunt, with the look of a man who had hollowed himself out and found the emptiness addictive. Clara was smaller, sharper, with eyes that held no amber at all, no wolf, just empty human irises, staring out from a face that had forgotten what connection felt like. They had been bonded once. They had chosen to cut that bond, to reach into the most sacred part of themselves and sever it, and the absence had given them power, power to corrupt other bonds, power to turn connection into weakness, power to build an army of hollow wolves who fought without fear, because they had already lost the thing that made fear meaningful. Philip looked at Cole and smiled. It was the smile of a man who had nothing left to lose and found the condition entertaining. "You still carry it," Philip said. His voice echoed in the chamber. "The bond. Fresh, too. Recent." He tilted his head. "You know what we do to fresh bonds." Cole did not answer with words. He had spent 3 years commanding from a distance, directing his wolves with strategy and precision, fighting the war as an intellectual exercise conducted on maps and in meetings. He had been brilliant at it. He had won battles through planning and coordination and the ruthless application of tactical logic. None of that mattered here. Here, in this chamber, against 2 wolves who had weaponized the absence of connection, the only thing that mattered was the presence of it. The bond with Lena, raw, new, less than a day old in its completed form, still an open wound of a thing, still bleeding at the edges where the claiming had torn through 18 years of walls and resistance and deliberate isolation. Philip and Clara moved first. They came at him together, coordinated, their emptiness reaching out ahead of them like a wave of cold that tried to find the bond in Cole's chest and rip it free. It found the bond. It pulled. Cole felt it. A tearing, a wrenching, a sensation like something was trying to pull his heart out through his ribs. The void reached for his connection to Lena and closed around it with the greedy hunger of a thing that had been starving for 3 years and had finally found a meal worth consuming. The bond bled. And then it grew back. Not smoothly, not cleanly. It grew back the way fella's root grows in burned soil, rough and stubborn and thick, pushing through the damage with a resilience that was not graceful but was absolute. Every time the void tore at it, the bond regrew thicker, uglier, more determined than before. It was not a beautiful thing. It was a survival thing. It was the scar tissue of 2 people who had been burned down to their foundations and had built something in the ruins that refused, categorically refused, to be unmade. Philip's smile disappeared. Cole fought. He fought with everything he had, which was everything he was, the wolf and the man and the bond and the burned ground and the fella's root and the memory of a woman who had carried 11 patients through 3 miles of frozen mountain, because leaving was not in her vocabulary. The fight lasted 7 minutes. It felt like 7 hours. It felt like 7 seconds. When it was over, Philip Ashworth was on the ground, and Clara Ashworth was against the wall, and the runes in the chamber were dark, and the void that had powered the hollow tongue for 3 years was collapsing inward, like a black hole that had finally run out of gravity. Cole stood in the center of the chamber, breathing hard, bleeding from a dozen places, his body shaking with the effort of holding himself together through the worst thing anyone had ever tried to do to him. The bond in his chest burned. It hurt. It was alive. He walked out of the mountain. His wolves were waiting. They had secured the stronghold. The hollow-tongued fighters, cut off from the void that powered them, had collapsed like puppets with severed strings, the corruption draining from their bodies, the emptiness filling with the slow, painful return of everything they had given up. Derek Price was sitting on a rock outside the cave entrance, bleeding from his left arm and feeding a piece of dried meat to a crow that had landed on his shoulder. "Harold?" Cole asked. "Margaret," Derek said. "Harold is around here somewhere." Cole looked at the sky. It was midday. The sun was out for the first time in weeks, breaking through the cloud cover that had sat over the Ashvale Range like a lid on a pot. Grace arrived with the main force an hour later. She took one look at Cole, one look at the stronghold, one look at the defeated hollow-tongued fighters being assembled in the clearing, and said, "Well, Cole agreed. You look terrible." "I feel terrible." "Lena is going to be furious about the state of you." Cole looked at Grace. He wanted to say something about her mate, about the cloak, about the years she had spent standing behind him and holding together everything he was too stubborn or too scared to hold himself. She shook her head. She knew. She did not need him to say it. The war ended that day, though the paperwork and the politics and the slow, grinding work of rebuilding would take months. The hollow tongue fractured without the Ashworth's void to sustain them. Some surrendered. Some fled. Some, the ones whose bonds had been severed too deeply to recover, wandered into the mountains and were never seen again, and Cole did not let himself think too long about what that meant, about the cost of Philip Ashworth's hunger, about the wolves who had been consumed by an emptiness they had not chosen. He thought instead about the wolves who survived, about the ones Lena had carried through the mountain, about the ones Derek had named crows after, about the ones Grace had organized and commanded, and held together with nothing but competence, and iron will, and a silence that spoke louder than any speech. Lena was waiting at the cave when he returned. She had relocated her patients to a larger chamber, organized a supply chain from the nearest intact camp, and was in the process of conducting a full medical inventory when Cole walked through the entrance looking like he had fought a mountain, and the mountain had put up a respectable effort. She looked at him. She looked at the blood. She looked at the way he was holding his left arm, which had taken a hit during the fight that he had been ignoring through the application of pure stubbornness. "Sit down," she said. He sat. She cleaned his wounds. She bound his arm. She worked with her usual efficiency, her hands steady, her focus absolute. She did not ask about the battle. She did not ask about the Ashworths. She treated his injuries with the same professional detachment she brought to every patient. Then she finished, and she sat down beside him, and she leaned into his shoulder again, that same 1-inch tilt, that same gravity-assisted collapse of the distance between them. "Thank you for coming back in one piece," she said. "Mostly one piece. Close enough." Cole put his arm around her, his good arm, the one that was not wrapped in bandages. He rested his hand on her shoulder and felt her breathe, felt the rise and fall of her ribs against his side, and the bond hummed between them, quiet now, settled, no longer burning but warm, a steady heat like embers in a hearth. They sat like that for a long time. The months that followed reshaped the Ashvale Range. Cole returned to Ironfang territory not as the cold, calculating alpha who had left 3 years ago, but as something the realm did not have a category for. A bonded war commander who had proven, in front of every alpha and every council and every elder who had ever lectured him about duty and legacy and the sacred obligations of the pack bond, that he would dismantle his own battle formation and fracture his own strategic advantage for one woman and win anyway. The elders who had wanted him bonded for political leverage discovered, with varying degrees of alarm, that a bonded Cole Ashford was not more controllable. He was significantly less. Because now he had something worth fighting for that existed outside the chain of command, outside the council's authority, outside the neat organizational structure that kept alphas accountable and manageable. Simon, the 74-year-old elder who still had all his teeth, attended the first council meeting after Cole's return. He looked at his alpha, looked at the woman sitting beside him who was reviewing a healer network proposal and paying the council approximately zero attention, and made the pragmatic decision to never raise the bonding issue again. Lena did not become a quiet partner who stood behind her alpha and smiled at formal events. She rebuilt the healer network across the entire Ashvale range, a cross-pack, neutral medical infrastructure that answered to no alpha, no council, and no political authority. It answered to Lena Marsh and the principle that wounded wolves deserve treatment regardless of which flag they fought under. Cole did not merely allow it, he funded it, he provided security, he made it clear, through diplomatic channels and less diplomatic ones, that interference with the healer network would be treated as a personal matter between the interfering party and himself. One neighboring alpha, a man named George Fletcher who had more territory than sense, protested the establishment of a healer station on his border. He sent a formal objection through diplomatic channels, citing sovereignty concerns and jurisdictional overreach. Cole visited him personally. The meeting lasted 4 minutes. George Fletcher withdrew his objection and sent a supply wagon to the healer station the following morning, with a note that said, "With compliments." The note was in George's handwriting, but everyone agreed it did not sound like something George would write voluntarily. Grace retired from active combat. She had fought long enough and hard enough and buried enough people to have earned the right to stop. She became the Ironfang's chief ambassador, the diplomatic mind behind Cole's military authority, the voice that walked into rooms first and made sure the rooms were worth walking into. She never commented on the bond, not directly, not once. At a feast held to celebrate the first anniversary of the war's end, Lena found Grace standing alone at the edge of the gathering, watching the fire with an expression that held more years than her face. "Thank you," Lena said, "for the cloak." Grace's expression did not change. She refilled Lena's cup from the pitcher she was holding. She looked at Lena for a moment, a long moment, and in that look was everything Grace would never say: the approval, the relief, the quiet, fierce, protective love of a woman who had watched a boy grow into a broken man and then watched a healer reach into the broken places and find something still alive. She refilled her own cup. She raised it slightly, a gesture so small that anyone watching would have missed it. Lena raised hers in return. They drank. They watched the fire. They did not need to say anything else. The Elder Council met one final time to discuss the matter of heirs. Simon, who had apparently not learned anything from 3 decades of dealing with alphas, raised the question with the careful diplomacy of a man walking through a field he suspected was mined. Cole looked at him. He looked at the council. He looked at them with the patience of a man who had fought a 3-year war against bond-severing dark magic and had walked into the heart of a mountain and fought 2 hollow wolves and sat on a cave floor for 4 hours with numb legs because the woman he loved was sleeping on his shoulder. "When she is ready," he said, "if she wants, and you will never ask again." They did not ask again. The final image is this. Months later, their territory, a night with no crisis, no war, no political maneuvering, no emergency council sessions, no hollow tongue, no burning camps, no frozen mountains, no bond corruption, no void, just a room, just a fire, just 2 people. Lena was reading a healer's manual, one of the old ones, handwritten, that she had been tracking down and collecting since the war ended. She was leaning against Cole's chest, her back against his front, the book propped on her knees. She had her hair down for once, no bandage tie, and it fell over his arm where it rested across her collarbone. Cole was reviewing border reports with his free hand. His other hand was in her hair, not stroking, not playing, just resting there, fingers curved against her scalp, a point of contact that confirmed a fact he no longer needed to question, but confirmed anyway, because confirmation was its own kind of pleasure. Lena reached up without looking away from her book. She moved his hand 2 inches to the left. Her preferred spot. She had a preferred spot. She had told him about it once, in the matter-of-fact tone she used for medical instructions, and he had filed it in the same part of his brain where he stored tactical intelligence, which was the part that mattered most. He adjusted. She settled. They kept reading. No dialogue. No declaration. No dramatic moment. Just 2 people who had survived the worst thing the world could throw at them, sitting in a quiet room, touching like gravity, inevitable and constant, and entirely without performance. Outside, the Ironfang territory stretched under a sky full of cold stars. The borders were secure. The treaties were holding. The healer network hummed along the Ashvale range like a living thing, Lena's creation, tended by healers she had trained and protected by wolves who answered to an alpha who had learned, finally and irrevocably, that strength was not the absence of vulnerability, but the willingness to be vulnerable and fight anyway. Grace was in the next room, reviewing ambassador correspondence. Derek Price was somewhere on the northern patrol route, probably naming another crow. Simon was in his quarters, being 75 years old and wise enough to keep his mouth shut for the remainder of his years. And Cole Ashford, alpha of the Ironfang Pack, who had spent 18 years believing that the bond was the enemy and 3 years learning that the enemy was his own fear, sat in a quiet room with the woman who had taught him that burned ground could grow the strongest roots, and he held her, and she let him, and the realm outside their door understood, with a clarity that would not fade for generations, that the most dangerous alpha was not the one with nothing to lose. It was the one who had found something worth losing and had chosen to fight for it with everything he had, and won.